All right, we are now live on air. We're on YouTube. Hey, everybody, this is Rich Stroffolino with Gestalt IT. Thanks so much for joining us. If you are, if you're watching it later, I hope while we were recording this, something happy was happening to you. I'm joined by Tom Hollingsworth, and we're doing something new here. It's called the Gestalt IT Rundown. We're going to do a weekly look at some of the news trends and other good stuff that's happening in enterprise IT and kind of try and figure them out and lay them out for you, get you all caught up. So, Tom, you excited to get started?
I am thrilled, Rich. Thanks for having me along.
Your enthusiasm drips through cyberspace, much like a form of tar.
Well,
all right, so, oh, yes, Tom.
I will make sure to wipe that up later. I'm sorry.
Oh, internet tar is very hard to get up. You need to use vinegar for that. So kind of first up, big news. We've had some partnerships and acquisitions from Cisco. Thought it was really interesting. One, they're on the hook now to, or supposedly are about to buy Broadsoft. I mean, it's basically, I don't think there's going to be any regulatory situations that would prevent them from acquiring them. They're paying more than like a couple billion right in that acquisition, something like that. They have Cisco, who cares? But they also announced a partnership with Google Cloud. So Tom, I'm told you know networking a little bit. What is the bigger deal here?
So it's interesting that both of these deals have one thing in common. They're both cloud focused. Broadsoft is a cloud hosting provider for Cisco communications collaboration. Google, of course, is a small little search engine company that may or may not also do some other things. I hear they make cars. And it's interesting that Cisco, the Broadsoft move didn't surprise me at all, mostly because Cisco is really trying hard to push the collaboration video content issue, and Broadsoft was probably the largest provider. So this gives them inroads into getting away from on-premises collaboration as being the only solution. I know this because many moons ago, I sold Cisco collaboration. And right whenever I got to the end of my shelf life as an engineer, I started to see the cloud providers taking over. With Google, as I'm sometimes fond of saying, this is 2:05 a.m. and Amazon's already gone home for the night, and Cisco needs to find a friend. AWS is a really weird animal because they're the biggest, baddest provider on the planet that owes nothing to anyone. They use a lot of non-Cisco gear in their cloud, and from all rumors, even that non-Cisco gear will eventually become non-anybody gear. It will all become, we built it in-house because we like it. We like building better than anything. And so now everybody else who was hoping to get all these huge cloud revenues has to find a friend. And by all accounts, Microsoft is shacked up pretty tight with Arista. So Google needs a friend.
Yeah, and it is weird, that Amazon has no allegiance to anyone, kind of impacts everyone else's relationships down the road. And you would think you might see more of these kind of announcements maybe coming out of Microsoft with Azure, but I feel like, again, there are some, because they do have allegiances, because they have this legacy of they're Microsoft. I definitely think that impacts them. So Google is, I think people are starting now to really, not that they were the number 3 player, they're probably going to be the number 3 player for a while, but we've seen some interesting announcements coming out with them. This almost reminds me more of just like a channel partnership, like it's like Cisco with Google Cloud, down the line. Yeah. So again, probably not as big as an all-out acquisition. Where does this fall, though, in the recent Cisco spate of acquisitions? I think before we started this, you mentioned they just celebrated their 200th acquisition. They've recently acquired Viptela, AppDynamics, right? Where does this fall in that?
So a lot of the acquisitions that they've been making recently, like you said, AppDynamics, Viptela, have been to kind of push into new areas. And a lot of people who are watching this are probably screaming, but what about IWAN? You know exactly why Cisco bought Viptela if you've ever used IWAN. But
they're probably crying because they're thinking about trying to set up IWAN.
Yeah, exactly. I told someone sometime in the last 6 months, I said, Cisco just needs to build a giant idol to IWAN in the middle of the desert, because that's exactly how many people are going to visit it. But with Broadsoft, this was about kind of eating your own tail. This was getting back into collaboration, doubling down on getting the word out about that, because Cisco needs to get the revenues up on that. They need to get more users involved. Google is all strategic. It's making a friend, or in this case, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. We've seen a lot of hay being made over the last couple of months about the partnership between AWS and VMware. And I'm sure that when you have a partnership between those two companies, oh, look, NSX just happens to be involved as well.
All right, so kind of in other cloud news, there was an announcement that now Microsoft Azure will be offering Cray supercomputers that are in Microsoft data centers, making those resources available to customers. Cray also had an announcement earlier this year that they were kind of going to be doing some, it was more regional, it was very bizarre, but they were also offering some kind of cloud instances through more regional, it wasn't even cloud providers, it was more of just a co-location kind of agreement. But bigger news for Microsoft, kind of trying to go for more academic or big data compute resources with Cray, or bigger news for Cray, just like someone's actually able to use them?
In other news, Cray is still a thing. No, this is all about Cray. This is all about Microsoft kind of tossing a bone to some of the traditional market. Now, funny thing is, every time somebody tells me mainframe is going away, I like to bring up the AS400 and the fact that if there's ever a nuclear war, the only things left will be cockroaches, Keith Richards, and AS400s. And so you've got Cray, who really, really, really needs the pub. And Microsoft is like, they're going to consume whatever compute resources you throw at them. Honestly, I kind of think this is an interesting thing, maybe in the academic side. Maybe they're trying to pull in some of those research type folks. But if you'd asked me to name off the top 5 selling products that Cray had last year, I bet you I couldn't even name one.
Although with the amount that they cost, they probably only need to sell 5 or so to kind of break even. So it doesn't really matter too much. Yeah, it is really interesting. You know, speaking of mainframes dying, I did see, I think it was an IBM's earning that they just reported for Q3 that their mainframe business increased by like 65% or something like that on the year. And it's mostly just people freaking out about security and their new, what is it, their Z line of servers or mainframes is like, I don't know. People want to buy them. Yep. All right. So coming up next, big news was coming out of DockerCon. They had their DockerCon Europe in Copenhagen. By all accounts, a smashing success. But one of the big announcements coming out of there was Kubernetes now being supported as an orchestrator for Docker. There's kind of, you know, the bloom has kind of fallen off the rose, if I'm using an aphorism correctly, a little bit for Docker, it feels like. When I first started, I mean, I've only been with Gestalt IT just about a year now. And when I first started, it was Docker is the hotness. Like that was one of the first things I learned about, you know, kind of the container space and the landscape there. And recently the narrative is kind of shifting. Is this more strategic for them? I mean, obviously Kubernetes works for the biggest of the big. And we're seeing a lot of companies that are offering Kubernetes as a service because it's really difficult. Is this more to kind of reclaim the narrative, or is this a vital for more business grounds?
If you remember the famous Wayne Gretzky quote, skate where the puck is going, not where it is. This is Docker skating as fast as possible to get in front of the puck because, well, they had the right idea in the past with all the stuff that they were building. What they were hoping is that they could build a complete package that everybody wanted to use. And what happened is, just like every good open source movement, just like everything where you don't control every piece of it, some people went out and found something that worked a little bit better and built around it. I mean, if you look at what Kelsey Hightower's doing with his Kubernetes the hard way stuff, I mean, he's basically teaching people how to use containers using Kubernetes as a scheduling system. And when you wake up and everyone's like, oh, well, Docker does it a little bit differently, you're like, well, then I'm not going to use Docker. I'll go back to doing it the way I learned. And so this was all about survival for Docker. I don't see them getting rid of their existing system anytime soon, but I also don't see them putting a whole lot more effort into it other than to kind of offer a plugin for Kubernetes going forward.
You're referring to Swarm?
Yeah, Swarm. And a lot of people have done some great things with Swarm. I was remembering some of the stuff that Alex Ellis was doing with Swarm last year and his Raspberry Pis, and I was very, very impressed. But you give it a year in the container lifecycle is like a decade in traditional infrastructure. People have moved on, and Kubernetes seems to be the de facto winner. And thanks to Docker embracing it, I bet you they'll be the de jure winner pretty soon.
Yeah, it certainly is. Well, and speaking of Alex Ellis, I follow his blog, and yeah, had the Docker Swarm. But you know what he has now is how to get Kubernetes up running on a Raspberry Pi cluster. So
Yep.
as Alex Ellis goes, so goes Docker, I guess. Uh, uh, Kind of in related news and kind of a little bit of more financial, I guess. MongoDB just had their IPO. By all accounts, successful. It was up 25%. It's kind of unusual. Not a ton of enterprise IT IPOs over the past year or so. But a lot of big acquisitions, kind of getting back to our conversation about Cisco. We've seen a lot of other, smaller companies maybe get acquired. It's been feeling like the landscape is getting a little bit more constrained as maybe venture funding is, or venture capitalists are kind of, reaching the end of their funding ropes on some of these projects and wanting to get a payout or something like that. So does the initial success of their IPO, do you think that's a bellwether for other enterprise IT, maybe IPOs or the landscape for investment? Or is this just an exception because it's related to big data and that's the new hotness?
I think it's an exception. Really, big data, I could slap big data on the side of a dumpster fire and probably get a Series A for it. Now, what happened here in my mind, first of all, when you look at the fact that the stock jumped 25% above the IPO price, you know what that means? MongoDB went in soft because they were afraid they weren't going to get their money, and somebody in an investment bank made out like a bandit. The other thing, too, is you referenced the whole unicorn startup thing. They're really killing themselves. They have these huge valuations. I was listening to NPR yesterday, and someone was saying that WeWork has like a $20 billion valuation, or the fourth largest valued startup in America, just behind SpaceX. The company that builds cars and rockets and all kinds of crazy things. But when you look at it on the surface, I don't see a whole lot of other companies going public to do this unless they have to, unless, the guys on Sand Hill Road suddenly close up the wallets and go, all right, I need something to sell before I'll give you any money. I expect that if you see the IPO train start to kind of slow down a little bit, it's because the conductor is trying to get some order in there.
Yeah, it is interesting. I mean, again, you're absolutely right. When you start, a big data it's unstoppable. It's this unstoppable. I mean, that and AI, I feel like we're probably going to see, I assume, some kind of AI company IPO. I don't know. And we'll probably make out like gangbusters just because of the recognition of the category as the it thing. But I never thought about that with the 25% jump that reeked of perhaps lack of confidence. So very interesting. In other news, and kind of maybe more security-related news, we were seeing reports out of Russia and the Ukraine about a new batch of ransomware called Bad Rabbit. It's the same old story, black screen of death with red text, pay us. This one, it was like pathetically small amounts of Bitcoin. It was like 0.05 Bitcoin. It's like $280. I mean, I know it's more about the loss of your business versus the price of the Bitcoin. That just struck me as like a really small amount for ransomware. But anyway, kind of wreaking havoc in the area, and of course, spread by a fake Adobe Flash Player installer. Another reason for Flash to die, perhaps. But it brought up the question to me, and I've been pondering this. I've been hearing a lot of briefings from companies in kind of approaching ransomware from a variety of directions. But in the enterprise, Tom, who do you think is responsible for ransomware recovery? Because I feel like ransomware prevention is a losing game, right? We can reduce the surface area that we're exposing to ransomware. We can minimize the impact of it, but I feel like whenever you have people interacting with computers, security is going to break down at some point. You have to expect that, and recovery then has to be an option. So is this strictly a disaster recovery? Is this a secondary storage? Is this all about data management? Is this a cloud story? Who is on the hook, I guess, or will end up being on the hook?
Honestly, it's got to be all of the above. And as soon as this happens, you're going to get into a situation where fingers get pointed in 14 different directions, and the firewall team is screaming at the mail server guys because they opened up a port, and how dare the stupid users open up a thing that looks so legitimate that I almost accidentally clicked on it. The truth of the matter is that you got to have all of these teams working in concert. So security guys know that this is a problem. The end users need to be educated that they don't need to do it. And the data recovery guys need to be on the ball. And that does not mean, hey, let's make sure the backups worked 6 months ago. Secondary storage is a perfectly good way to look at it. We've got to keep these things up to date and moving and capable of being recovered at a moment's notice. You're right. These things are going to happen. I've given up on hoping that we can stop data breaches. And whoever's using my social security number out there, remember, I like them in blue. No, data is going to get exposed. People are going to get violated. The craftier things get. If you follow Swift on Security on Twitter, they tweet out some of the crazy phishing things that they get in their spam filters, and some of them are getting really, really good. And I can't expect my wife or my mom or Bob from accounting to not know to click on that any more than Bob knows things about things that he does that I don't know. So we've got to create a multi-layered kind of system. Look at physical security. You don't just lock a door to keep people out of Fort Knox. You have guards at the gate. You have impediments to get people in. And even if they do manage to get into Fort Knox, you have, an armored division there to deal with them. It's not a matter of hoping that there's a one magic key that's going to make this work. You got to get your teams working together. It's almost like we need a secure ops thing for ransomware.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I've seen companies like Quorum, for example, which is a pure disaster recovery play, making the argument they have an on-queue plug it into your rack and you can actually stand up your production on it super quick and all that stuff. We have companies like Cohesity, like I said, in the secondary storage market, or even you're starting to see companies like Commvault kind of get into that market. They're coming at it from more of a hyper-converged perspective. But then you're also seeing, I think it's really interesting that maybe the more interesting story about this is maybe a company like Scale, what their recent announcement with Google Cloud, another prominent announcement with Google Cloud, what they're doing with their nested virtualization of being able to stand that up as kind of a backup really quick. And then more importantly, being able to just port all your settings right over there and directly, spin up the cloud super quick. That all comes down to the devil's in the details when it comes to ransomware in terms of making sure, you have backups that are incremental enough that you're not going to lose, customer data or valuable business data down the line. But, it is interesting to me. I think we haven't yet seen the solution because everyone's kind of coming at it piecemeal yet. Yeah. And I do think there's either a startup happening right now that's going to be that company that kind of brings all of these together, or it's going to be maybe a big player, maybe someone like Cisco comes out, and comes together with like an all-in-one, a cloud component on-prem, all that stuff, and kind of offers a unified solution. Because right now it does feel really piecemeal that people are just scrambling to kind of realize this isn't going to be one business experiencing it. This is going to be an entire hospital network. This is going to be, power plants across the nation or something like that. Crazy exposure. And I do, one thing I do want to say is I almost feel like user education is almost a lost cause at this point, and not because people can't learn things, but the idea of social engineering is one of the big reasons that this happens. This in particular was, a flash certificate or a flash installer. So, that may be a user education thing. But when it comes to people sending you emails from addresses you think you recognize and wanting to open attachments, as we're going to have, machine learning, we're going to have bots that are programmed with, say your email gets hacked, they build a bot custom based on people that you interact with. You have users have no chance. Maybe a very educated user, but I feel like it can minimize, or it can help reduce the exposure to ransomware, but that's just a very small part of the overall answer.
Yeah, this stuff is becoming so sophisticated. This is not your macro viruses and those kinds of things from the late 90s, early 2000s. I remember working at Gateway 2000 the day that Slammer hit, and we had to deal with the deal with that. And when you look at what we're dealing with now, this isn't DDoS. This is, hey, give me $50 or I erase your computer. And it's so sophisticated now. If I could go back in time and tell myself, I'm like, hey, you should probably start looking at this encrypted ransomware stuff. If you know how to defeat that, you're going to make yourself a fortune in the future.
All right, and the last kind of story we have a launch coming out actually today. I got a briefing with them about a week ago. It's a company called Aparavi, and I have to take some exception. They're based off of a Latin word, and in classical Latin, there is no hard V sound. It's a W sound, so it would be Aparavi, but they don't want to pronounce it that way. Whatever. But it's a really interesting idea. It's a SaaS platform that's built around multi-cloud, long-term data retention. So you have a software appliance in your data center that works with some endpoint storage that has a client installed on it. It all talks to a web portal that you interact with. It's all designed so that you can set up multiple policies to move things around to multiple clouds or to multiple tiers based on data retention policies. It can dump data, or it can securely remove data once, if it's medical data that you have to keep for 7 years and then destroy or something like that. All sorts of compliance built in. A really interesting idea, but it does beg the question, when it comes to cloud, we're definitely out of the emergent space for cloud. I mean, everyone still is trying to deal with the impact of the cloud, but it's no longer emergent. Like, this is something that every enterprise is either planning on dealing with or going through the digital transformation or what have you. This to me feels like cloud almost as legacy, where you're worried about something that's going to be down the road, that's going to be an issue 5 years from now.
Mm-hmm.
What is the next kind of legacy issue that cloud is going to have to deal with if it's not long-term, data retention? I'm just kind of curious.
It's funny. As you were describing what this said, I had this picture in my mind of a law office that I used to do some work for. They had a room in a very expensive building, one room dedicated to file boxes and file boxes and file boxes. And I asked them, I said, how long do you have to keep this? And they just kind of shrugged their shoulders. We think forever. Ask if anyone wants to have some fun. Ping Exchange got us on Twitter and ask her about email retention policies. Just be ready to get stabbed, because that's a sore spot with her. We've got so much data out there, and it's not easily digestible data. Same law office that rented the room and a floor of an expensive skyscraper. All of their data was in WordPerfect. They were still using WordPerfect on their machines because, well, all of their case files were in WordPerfect. The ones that weren't on physical papers, we can't upgrade. We can't move this. Data portability is going to be huge. And if you don't believe me, somewhere in my house, I still have about 5 CDs that someone gave me with pictures of my kids on them. And I don't know that I have a computer that I can put those in anymore. So we've got to figure out if everything's going to be online anymore, fine. But we've got to figure out how to make it easy to digest. We've got to make it easy to respond to. And we have to make it so that if we have to go back and find something 20 years from now, we have a way of doing that. Because if we don't, we're going to lose so much data every year to, bit errors, or the company that made the program that used to be able to read this Corel Draw file went out of business a decade ago, or something like that.
Oh God, yeah. It actually it reminds me of an old Jim Gaffigan bit where he talks about he bought a new computer because he just needed to throw more photos on it, and when someone ever asks, where are the old photos? It's just on the old computer. It's just unplugged, sitting in a corner. That's literally like the state of data retention right now. And I know the experience. I used to work at a law firm, and the exact same thing. It was, well, I guess we just keep this forever, and then we move it to we move it to offsite storage, but we still need to have it forever. And for a lot of organizations, digitizing that and moving that to the cloud, and having the, being able to have the ability to easily move it between clouds, move it, and also like the idea of also being able to then that puts price pressure, down the road on the cloud providers, especially in their archive tiers and stuff like that, to and gives an opportunity for new players like Wasabi, who is kind of new into the cloud, just brand new into the cloud storage game, to really make a case for hey, we can differentiate in performance, we can differentiate on price. Kind of changes when you have a really a smart multi-cloud solution. So check out if you're interested. Yeah, they just came out today, so check out Aparavi, kind of a cool new startup. All right, so that just about does it, I think, for the Gestalt IT Roundup. We'll be back next Wednesday, midday. I think we're going to try and do these around 12:30. It'll be me and Tom. If you have any comments, feel free either on the YouTube video. We'll post this on Facebook, so facebook.com/GestaltIT. And of course, go to gestaltit.com. And if you're interested in more audio goodness or video goodness, really, we also have a dedicated podcast, the on-premise IT Roundtable. Yes, we're using that correctly. No, don't email me about it. I don't care. And you can check that out. Actually, our topic this week was secure. Our premise this week is security is a dumpster fire. It's a really great episode. Kind of gets into some of the stuff we were talking about, Tom. So until next time, I'm Rich Stroffolino, like I said, on Twitter at Mr. Anthropology. Tom Hollingsworth at Networking Nerd, right, Tom? I can't read your lower third because you're not talking. Okay. So yeah, check us out, and we'll be back next week. Thanks for watching, listening, consuming, dear listener, watcher, viewer. Bye now.